That's good. Any other questions out there? Over here, boss. Go on, son.
Just a question for you, Ricker. So you've got 2 European champions there. Obviously, one of them, Sergio Rabchenko, WBC silver champion as well. Just wondering when he'd be fighting for a proper world title. Seen him in the gym, seen him spar really, really good. Just wondering when he's got the big day coming up, please.
We're just hanging fire at the minute because he's WBC ranked #1. We had to make. We had to hang out a decision to see what Floyd Mayweather did, because if you remember, Floyd Mayweather had the light middleweight and the welterweight titles. So. You know, now Floyd's moved to welterweight. You know, I'd like to have thought the WBC would have moved a little bit quicker on the matter, but they haven't. So he's there in #1. If it's not forthcoming very soon, we're going to get him like a filler-in fight. But it's very difficult to get filler-in fights when you're #1 in the world. You don't want to take the risk of losing that #1 status, and also, you know, you just don't want to take the chance on getting beat. He's in a great position. So. You know, I think there's the likes of Alvarez there that he could be fighting for the vacant title, but I think we're about to hear it any time, to be honest.
The Sass, is it going to be in Monaco again, or are you going to have him in England, or one of the big shows now, your big Box Nation?
Well, it depends on the opponent, where you know to where it goes. You know, we're doing a lot of work with Box Nation, really. You know, Sergey's had a couple of fights that have been on Box Nation. You know, when his defence against Bradley Price in Bulgaria, so. No, there's no reason that the British fight fans will see him on TV, even though he's from Belarus. He's a very exciting fighter. He goes for the knockout, and but it depends on the opponent. If he fights somewhere like Alvarez, it will probably be the United States, But he's in the mix, and we're just waiting at the side of the phone to see what raises he said. But he'll be next in line for the world title, so that's a big plus for me. I mean, being a world champion myself, if I could be, have promoted a world champion and trained a world champion, because I promote and train him, that'd be a nice little personal milestone for myself, I guess, as well.
And also, just to add to that, the WBC have refusing and are refusing to take away Mayweather's title. So ridiculous was it last weekend when he fought Marcus Maidana, even though it was at welterweight and it was a 147 limit, they allowed him to also defend his light middleweight title, which Maidana wouldn't have won, but he could defend. So go figure. Yeah, they don't want to. He's a cash cow.
Well, that's why we're waiting a little bit longer than we thought, to be honest with you. But yeah.
Any other questions? Go on, son.
Hi, Rick. The Klitschkos have ruled for quite a number of years now, Rick. You see, we could ever see that happening with the Furies. What with Tyson being more or less going to get a chance of a world title fight. You've got Yui coming through, and I do believe that there's another Yui coming through as well who's ready to make his debut. Especially when you've got the piece of Fury behind him, who seems, from what I've heard about him when he's talking, he's very, very wise and clued up with what's going on in the boxing game.
Oh, they're a good fighting family, aren't they? And every champions, every great champions, and the Klitschkos are great champions, the reign will come to an end sometimes. Even, a lot of people are starting to say Floyd Mayweather's reign might be coming to an end. He didn't quite, so, everyone's reign has to come to an end. And if you look at the heavyweights that are following up, just behind the Klitschkos, there's no one stands out any more than Tyson, to be honest with you. I don't think Tyson stands out any less than any of the other heavyweights. So if they move on, he's got every chance, and it's good from our point of view, from being a Mancunian, that you've got the next. I've retired now, and the likes of Joe Kawasaki retired. When you see all the kids that we had from the Olympics coming through, and Tyson Fury coming through, and Yui Fury coming through, it's like, especially in Manchester boxing, we've got the next conveyor belt waiting to join us. So for us Mancunians, I think it's great, and nobody would convince me that if the Klitschkos do move on, anybody has got a better chance than Tyson Fury.
If you look at the way the heavyweights are, I mean, if David Haye gets an all clear in September or August from his doctor, he comes back. Price has got a big fight at the Echo, probably in November if he comes through his next fight. Providing his head's all right, he's back. We've got Big Josh coming up, the gold medalist. Whether you agree with what happened at the Olympics or not, the bottom line is he was still there for 5 fights, still taking on guys he had no right to be competing against. So Joshua comes through. And if you looked at 5 Americans, if we just throw out 5 American names, I've got to be honest with you, one of the best Americans trains with Tyson and Yuri and Peter Fury in Eddie Chambers. That leaves a couple of others who are fighting on Box Nation tonight, one called Bermain Stavern and one called Chris Ariola. And before you say it, yes, sometimes he is a right tit. You see those two guys, they could be walking through here now completely naked, unless they had tattoos. Well, they both got tattoos, unless you could read their names, you'd struggle to see who they are. So I've got to be honest with you, on the world stage, our heavyweights are as well poised as any of the Americans, and there's nothing coming through in Europe apart from a guy called Kubrat Pulev from Bulgaria. Now I've got to be honest with you, I'm imagining that most of you out there like to go in pubs and you like to stand around with your friends socialising. I know one conversation that you've never had. You've never turned to a pal of yours as you picked up a pint and gone, I tell you what, I can't wait to watch that Kubrat Pulev next week. That's a conversation you've never had and you're never going to have. But you are saying, you see Tyson Fury, I wouldn't mind a bit of that. You see Derek Chisora, I wonder if Hayes going to come back. You see, it's about buzzing, it's about names. And the thing with Ricky, and we used to do this as a social experiment. Whenever Ricky fought, the crowds would just get bigger and bigger. And when we first switched to the MEN, I think it was for his first WBU defence, I think it was set out, let's say, at 3,000 and it sold 4. The next fight it was set out at 5 and it sold 7. And what was happening and what no one seemed to realise was that everybody was talking about Ricky. Most of you, in all fairness, had a pint with him. Certainly by the time we got to the Vegas days, you couldn't meet anybody that didn't have a personal Ricky Hatton story. We did that on 5 Live once, do you remember, Rick? We walked out in a line in Vegas, there was about 35,000 Brits there, and we did it live into a BBC show. I said, I will stop 10 people at random, men, women, old, young, all sorts of different colours, ugly, good looking, well dressed, scruffy sods. And I said, every single one of them will have a Ricky Hatton story. So I stopped the first person, it was a woman. She said, oh yeah, it goes to my sister's bar in Manchester, no problem. We stopped someone else, and he'd been at a dinner in Birmingham, and he'd had a drink with Ricky. Every single one of them, 10 random people, they'd all met him. And I think it's getting to be the same to a degree with Tyson. But suddenly people are starting to see him, they're starting to recognise him, and they're starting to talk about him. And when it comes to title fights, when it comes to big fights, like this thing on the 26th, tickets available down the front here from Richard, starting at 60 quid. That's the only promotional plug I'm going to do in the first hour. When it comes to guys like Tyson, people are starting to talk about him. Now, whether you're talking about him because you want to see him knocked out, because you don't like him, it doesn't matter. You're talking about him. Remember Chris Eubank years ago? Hold your hands up if you honestly wanted to see him get knocked out every time he fought. And then by the end of his career, when he was fighting, there was blood coming out of his nose, his eye was cut, he was giving away 2 stone to Carl Thompson, you were screaming at him like he was your long-lost brother, wanting him to win. So he won you over. It took a lot of years, and boy, it did a lot of damage, but he did win you over in the end, didn't he? Any more questions? Yeah, one down here. A mic over to this man.
Hi, Rick. Oh. How long before your young prospect, Ryan Burnett, gets a title shot?
To be honest with you, I think it will happen sooner rather than later. He's in the bantamweight division. And obviously, as you know, there's not as many bantamweights, you know, out there as maybe there are middleweights and welterweights and stuff like that. So it could happen for him quicker rather than later. Not just because of the fact that there's not that many bantams out, because I believe he's that good. You know, I worked hard for my reputation, and I wouldn't want to stick it on the lines for me to have my neck chopped off. But I think, you know, Cal Frampton, probably one of the most exciting fighters in Britain at the minute. You know, he's looking, you know, he's flying the flag for Belfast boxing. I don't see why Ryan can't be there exactly in the same place in 12 months' time. You know, there was one thing when I was with Frank Warren, he was very good at knowing how to bring me on at the right stage, at the right time, and move me up in class and never rush me on too fast. So I like to think I've learned from the best, and I don't know how to bring him along perfectly, but I mean, at the end of the day, if he's good enough, he's going to be good enough. And you know, I think, to be honest with you, you know, a lot of people will be here now thinking, who in God's earth is Ryan Burnett? Well, you know, watch out for the name. I think he'll be at the top very, very shortly, very shortly.
Yeah, I tend to agree. And there's another. Did you get a microphone? Did you get a microphone, son? There we go. Geezer in the air.
Hello. Boxing seems to be, for general people, at a bit of a decline. People aren't really talking about it as they did, you know, decades ago. What do you think people can do? Perhaps this question for both of you. What do you think boxers and promoters could do to perhaps raise the profile of boxing, so boxers like yourself have become, and a few in the past, become household names, so boxing becomes more interesting again for normal people?
I don't. It's hard to answer that. I think boxing. I think we do have our more. I think, you know, when you saw Amir Khan put in a great performance against Louis Collazo, you know, in Vegas the other week, We've got the Cal Groves fight, which everyone is talking about. The fact that the first one was a good fight, it was controversial, and the fact that they don't like each other. You know, we've got a Mancunian heavyweight here that's going for. So I think, you know, there is good things to be happy about. You know, we are the Olympic champions. You know, when you think it was only a few years ago, we only had a mare come through for the Olympics. Now we've had a heap of them, you know, come through. So I think it is in quite good state. You know, you know, stuff what we're doing today. You know, people want to, you know. And if the press can bang it out there more and more, you know, so people are seeing more and more of these lads. You know, I don't know. It's very hard for me to answer. I mean, I probably had, you know, I'm not saying I was the greatest fighter that ever lived, but I had probably the biggest following. And if you ask me, you know, could I bottle it? I wouldn't know how to do it. You know, to be honest with you, I don't know. It's very hard to say. If certain fighters have either got it or, you know, they haven't. And I think there's a few fighters out there, you know, like Cal Frock, who'll take on the all-comers. Tyson, who's very character, you know, whether you hate him or like him, you want to listen to him. So they are good. There's some good people out there, Steve, isn't there? It's just, it's hard. It's an hard one to answer, man.
It's more professional boxers in Great Britain than there's been for 60 years. People will be quite shocked by that. In the 70s, which people consider to be some kind of golden decade, there's two things that happened. First of all, everything was in the newspapers, so you couldn't go anywhere but newspapers. There was no Radio 5 Live even, there was no Sky, and the fights are on terrestrial TV. So Charlie Magri in a British title fight, or Alan Minter in a world title fight, they would get 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 million. They'd also be paid peanuts. Charlie Magri, who filled out Wembley, was a world champion and a really good world champion, watched by 12 million people. He works for Hackney Council collecting the refuge, okay? John Conti, Alan Minter and John Stracey, great champions, all watched by 15 million people on BBC, all on the back pages of the Daily Mirror, the front pages and the inside page of other papers. They were so big, they were so enormous. They have to get up every single day and try and get a living on the after dinner circuit. So in many ways the business then, it was high profile, so people on the street did know who the 12 boxers were, but they didn't know the other 400. The situation we've got at the moment is we've got just over 1,000 boxers with licenses. That hasn't happened since the 50s when national service was being phased down and people were being demobbed and they had to fight because there weren't enough jobs. That's a bit of a history lesson. I know it sounds boring, but just trying to get to your answer, and I will get there eventually, is this business at the moment is having bigger gates, bigger sellouts. The fighters are getting paid so much more money, and just because they're not on terrestrial TV, Ricky could have fought on terrestrial TV. If he wanted to fight for peanuts, he could have been on BBC. Carl Froch, David Haye, they started out on BBC, and if they were on the BBC now, they'd get 20 million people. Carl Froch against George Groves on a Saturday night would get 23 million people. Here's the difference. Carl's going to make about 8 million. If he fought on the BBC, he'd be lucky to get 500,000. If I get Carl Froch up here now, I know what he'd say about exposure. It's about pound notes. So that's why it's driven. So the business now is actually bigger than it's ever been. The bottom line is it's just played out on Sky, on Box Nation, on ESPN, and most of the coverage is online, on the internet. There's a young guy down the front here. He does more coverage than every single newspaper combined. And most of you don't even know who he is. You know who the Sun is, you know who the Daily Mail is. There's a young guy down the front here called Coogan. His stuff is probably watched and seen and read by more than all of those national newspapers combined. And he's blushing, I've never seen him blush.
I think you need more fighters wanting to fight the best as well.
Yeah, but Rick, they don't need to. If they can make all that money over there.
Done it, you know what I mean? There's, you know, you want to fight the best. The minute you've won a title, make a unification fight, you know. The days of 15 defences, you know, fight the best, innit? I think that's what.
Fight the best. That would also
want to see us fight.